Hey, it's John. Welcome back to my channel, and today I've got a bit of a Q&A for you. Now, this Q&A is all going to be about what it's like being a locomotive engineer at a Class 1 railroad, because if you didn't know, that's what my actual job is. So I put out a call yesterday for questions from you guys, and I got a lot of very interesting questions, so I'm looking forward to doing this video. So the first question is, what can someone who wants to start a career on the railroad do to show potential employers that they are a good candidate? Now, this is an interesting one, and I've got to preface this answer with saying that the American Freight Railroad Network is still kind of recovering from the downturn in coal and disruption from the pandemic. So at least at the terminal that I work at, we still have several dozen people that are furloughed. So there might not be too many hirings at the railroad anytime soon. And the same kind of goes with Amtrak. They had to furlough several hundred employees due to the drop in service from 7 days a week to 3 days a week on their long distance trains. But fortunately, with the coronavirus package going through, that should be recalling all those employees pretty soon. But as far as if they ever do hire train crews again, the advice I got before I hired on was either get a job that involved operating heavy machinery. I was a construction management major in college, and I did a summer working construction. Most of the Class 1 railroads have training centers affiliated with community colleges, and I think most of them have public college degree courses that are open to the public. I know my railroad has one down in Kansas City. So if that's something that might interest you, it's definitely not going to hurt your chances of getting hired on. But like I said, it's probably going to be a few years before there's any major hiring waves again. I've been working there just under 10 years now, so I got hired in. There was a huge hiring wave after the Great Recession of 2008, and that started actually in late 2010. And getting hired on at the railroad is a very tedious process. It's best to, if you know somebody, that's the best way to get hired. They don't make it easy. They make you jump through a bunch of hoops. You have to do get physical tests done. You have to do some skills tests. You have to pass drug tests, that kind of thing. So yeah, if you want to work at the railroad, it's a good paying job. It's a very demanding job, and we will get into some of those things later. But just keep your eye out. Never know. The hiring waves at the railroad are huge peaks and troughs, and maybe traffic will pick up this year, and they'll need a whole lot more employees. I don't have any answers about when they'll be hiring again. But so another question is, are you looking out the windows? And the answer is yes, always. Some conductors, that's all they do. Next question, what are the hours like? How often are you home? Also, what's the longest and your favorite journey you've driven for the railroad? The first question is, what are the hours like? They're terrible. Even when I hired out 10 years ago, there was a lot more scheduled jobs at the terminal that I work at. So there would be locals that go on duty 5 days a week and have weekends off, and they go on duty at the same time every day. Most of those are gone. Most of the yard jobs, they still have 3 shifts in the yard, but they've trimmed yard jobs. Definitely don't even consider a career at the railroad if you think that you wouldn't be able to deal with having no schedule for the rest of your life, because it's basically the size of it. I work on a call. I'm on an extra board still, even though I've been there almost 10 years. So they can call me to go any direction. We go 5 directions out of the terminal that I work at. Any time of the day. There's no call windows. The easiest way to get time off is just call in sick. And the second way to get time off is we have personal leave days and vacation days. But if things are really busy, then they won't approve those. And third day is getting FRA mandated rest, which is in some terminals very hard to do. The way that FRA mandated rest works is you either get 6 or 7 starts in a row, and you have to have less than 24 hours off between each of those starts, or else you get reset. And your count, even if you have 5 starts and you're about to get 2 days off, then you go back to 0 and have to do it all over again, which happens all the time. It gets really, really old. But I'm not going to complain too much about it. It is what it is. If you work 6 days in a row, then you get 48 hours off. And if you work 7 starts in a row, then you get 72 hours off. And keep in mind, even though 48 hours is 2 days and 72 hours is 3 days, that's all the time you get. So if you get off at 9 o'clock at night, you're going to be going back to work at 9 o'clock at night 2 days later. And you don't get the extra like 16 hours that you would get at a normal job when you have 2 days off. How often am I home? It's either every day or every other day, basically. When we go short, when we're just dog catching a train that ran out of time and couldn't make it into the yard, then we'll work, 8 to 12. Per the FRA regulations, we can only work 12 hours in one shot, and then we have to have 10 hours undisturbed rest, plus usually a 2-hour call. So 12 hours on, 12 hours off. Hopefully less, and hopefully more time off, but that's just the way it goes. But if we make a trip over the road, then we'll be gone. The trip will take, 8 to 12 hours to get there, sometimes less, sometimes more. Then we'll have at least 12 hours off in the hotel. Sometimes we can be in the hotel a very long time. The longest I've ever been in the hotel was in Iowa, and that was like 38 and a half hours. Got real old. That doesn't usually happen. That only really happens when things are really messed up, but it can. There's no schedule. That's just what I'm trying to make clear. And then, of course, once you get called in the hotel, you'll come back and the trip will be 8 to 12 hours. So most trips usually last between 30 to 40 hours. And as far as what is the longest and my favorite journey that I've ever done, the longest journey we've had out of the terminal I work in, which is Lincoln, Nebraska, it was Lincoln to Alliance, Nebraska. It's our main coal route out to the Powder River Basin. That was 367 miles, and that is way, way, way too long for low priority freight trains to travel. The way that it had been for like 150 years leading up to that was crews out of Lincoln would go to Ravenna, Nebraska, change out, rest out, and then come back home the next day. And these crew routes have historically been either 100 to 130 miles, and that was based on the mileage that steam locomotives could travel back when the railroads were set up. So Lincoln to Ravenna is 130 miles. The next crew change point was Ravenna to Seneca, Nebraska. That was another 100 miles, I think it was. And then Seneca to Alliance, I think, was 130 miles. So instead of a train crew going from Lincoln to Ravenna to Seneca to Alliance, they were expecting 2 people to do that all in one shot, all 367 miles. And that is just a product of trying to consolidate and cut expenses. And it might have looked good on paper. Whenever they do a run through like that, or change something up, they always try to make it work. And so that means everybody is on the ball. And, the trains are ready to go in the yard when the crew gets on duty or even shuttled out. And you van out, jump on your train, go, and don't stop. And if you do that, my first trip out to Alliance was it was about 9 hours and 15 minutes running time, pretty much nonstop, which is also way too long to go without a break. But over time, they slowly devolved into the trains wouldn't be ready in the yard, or there would be track work, or something would delay your trip. And if anything delayed you by more than an hour, you're dead. There was no way you're going to make it all the way to Alliance or to Lincoln and back. So, needless to say, that didn't last. It only lasted like 2 years. It shouldn't have lasted that long, but now we're going back to changing out at Ravenna again. So like I said, that has to be about the longest freight run in this country. If somebody knows anything longer, I can't imagine where it would be, but correct me if I'm wrong. As far as my favorite run, I did work out of Los Angeles for 6 months back in 2013. And so I only made the trip a few times because there's not a whole lot of freight traffic that moves from San Diego up to Barstow. But I made that trip, I think, about 4 times. And it was usually at night, but we get to run along the surf line there with the Pacific Surfliners and Coaster and Metrolink. And it was phenomenal for a farmer like me. So the next question is, have you ever gone through the Hatchbee Loop? If so, how was the experience? Short answer is no. The crews that go over Hatchbee Pass are based out of Bakersfield. And there's no way in hell I'm ever going to live in Bakersfield. But I did run up to Barstow for about 5 months. And I do love the run over Cajon Pass. It's a pretty different railroad from around where I work, even though it's the same company. It was just a really good experience getting to see all the ports in Los Angeles and Long Beach and getting to run over the mountains. And I really enjoyed Cajon Pass, but we'll talk about Cajon Pass more in just a little bit. All right, the next question is, what is the blue flag for? This is actually a really good question. And a blue flag protection, all that means is that a physical blue light or piece of plastic is placed in front of the engineer's control stand, and that means you can't touch anything. Because that means there's either locomotive crews or carmen working on the train, and they could be in very dangerous positions, like underneath wheels or inside the engine or any situation you can imagine, working on the train, and it would not be good if you touch the controls and inadvertently move the train. So blue flag means that employees are working on the train and you can't touch the controls. Common scenarios where they're blue flagged is if you're doing an air test or refueling the locomotives. And when we come into a big yard like in Lincoln, Lincoln is basically like a big gas station with a small hump yard. They're trying to change that. They're trying to make the hump more important and the fueling of the coal trains less important, but that is what it is. And so there's 5 fueling tracks on the south side of the yard that fuel the loaded coal trains and 5 fueling tracks on the north side of the yard that fuel the empty coal trains. And so it's just one right after the other. As far as straight refueling without having to perform an air test, they can get a train in and out of Lincoln in like a half an hour. That never happens. It usually is more like an hour to hour and a half minimum. We'll spot up the train right. Yeah, there's like a 3-foot wide box that they want the steps spotted up in. It's gonna be a little tricky with a loaded coal train, but you get the hang of it after a little while. And now for the next question: what is a manifest train, or what does manifest mean? So a manifest train is just mixed freight. I'm not exactly sure where the term originates from. I would imagine it has to be like they bundle up all the different cars from the locals that bring a train, that bring cars into the yard, for instance, and the longer train manifests itself or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. I know that the manifest can also refer to the paper train list of what is actually in a train. But yeah, basically mixed freight train. All right, and now the next question is, what's the largest animal you've ever hit with your big, bad freight hauling machine? The largest animal I've ever hit would be a deer or a dog. I've hit several of both. My brother actually hit a miniature horse. I understand that made a hell of a bang. But it's not uncommon to hit cows. I've seen a lot of cows on the right of way, and we always report them to the dispatcher so that a track inspector can go out there and try to notify the farmer whose cows they are, because the railroad doesn't like hitting livestock, obviously. And in the worst case scenario, Amtrak actually, I think it was just west of Hastings several years ago, they hit like 60 or 80 cows or something completely insane like that. Made quite a mess, as you can imagine, and that's not a good situation. So, in fact, they brought the train into the yard the next morning, and the fire department hosed it off. So, now the next question is about the picture that I posted in my Q&A, which was the interior of an ES44 AC locomotive, and the question is, isn't that Wabtec box awfully in the way? And the answer is yes, it definitely is. But that Wabtec box is actually the Integrated Electronic Train Management System, or PTC, or Positive Train Control. And I'm definitely not upset about having that Wabtec box in the way, because PTC is a very important life-saving system that keeps me out of trouble and keeps everybody else safe for the most part. If you want to learn more about PTC, you can check out my recap of 2020 video up here. If you don't know what Positive Train Control is, it's basically an automatic system that will automatically stop trains to prevent them from overspeeding, exceeding their authority, or entering maintenance-away track restricted areas. And PTC is, of course, a direct result from the Metrolink crash of 2008, and it's a very good system, and it's finally almost completely done being installed. There's still a couple of years before it's deployed on almost every train running on Class 1s in this country, but it's very good that we have this system, and I'm happy to have it. All right, now the next question is, what's my favorite locomotive? So I will relate it basically to what I run. My railroad, there's a lot of switch engines that we use in the yard and on locals, and they've been rebuilt so many times, you know, like Jeep 28s, Jeep 30s, Jeep 40s, SD 40s. They've all been rebuilt so many times that they're pretty much homogeneous in the way that they operate. It's a little annoying, like all of the control stands are pretty much slightly different in some ways. The switches will be moved around just a little bit. So sometimes it's annoying, sometimes it's, you know, pretty standard, but that's just is what it is. But as far as the main over-the-road locomotives that we use all the time, we have SD70 ACEs built by EMD and GE ES44 ACs or C4s or DCs. The operation of the GEs across the 3 different variants is all pretty much the same. And very similar to the operation of the SD70 ACEs. There are slight differences, and I actually did a whole video about It was one of my earliest videos, so if you want to see that, let me know. I can repost it. I made it private, but the main difference is, at least at this point in time, is all of the GE locomotives that we run have inward-facing cameras, and it's not the end of the world having a camera inside the locomotive, but it is a little annoying. I mean, nobody likes being on camera all day, especially if you're just sitting all day long. It's annoying, but most of our SD70s don't have cameras yet. They're obviously coming. So right now, I like operating the SD70 ACEs because they don't have cameras, but at the same time, they also don't have GE's Trip Optimizer software. And Trip Optimizer is basically an auto-run program that is actually getting more and more sophisticated now on a lot of locomotives. It's actually integrated with PTC, so it knows where you're going and where you're supposed to be stopping, so it'll actually almost bring you all the way down to a stop. You still have to completely stop it on your own, but if you're tired, having Trip Optimizer makes a world of difference. It's just like having an autopilot in an airplane. And that said, there's times when I still enjoy running the train, but the other main reason why I would prefer to have Trip Optimizer now is because the railroad has, to try and cut fuel costs more and more to drive down the cost of operations, they put throttle restrictions on your train so you can't exceed either throttle 5, 6, 7 if you're not running Trip Optimizer. So if you have an SD70 on the head end, then you're going to be stuck with throttle 5 on an empty, and if it's a really windy day out, you might not even break 30 miles an hour, which gets real old. But, so yeah, for the most part, I like Optimizer. It sucks being on camera, but it just is what it is. All right, the next question is, as an American, which freight lines do you think will be electrified first, and what would you want to drive on such duties? This is a difficult question because there has been talks about maybe one day theoretically electrifying some lines on the American Rail Network. I know there's this kind of kooky project called Solutionary Rail, which I'm not in any way affiliated with. The only real scenario where I can see a freight line getting electrified and the freight railroads actually using electric locomotives on it would probably be a scenario like Cajon Pass. Cajon Pass between Barstow and downtown Los Angeles. It's a pretty short distance. It's only 149 miles between those two terminals. And given that it's located in the state of California, I could conceivably see a future where, you know, either federal, state, local funds are used to offset the cost of electrification from the railroad. And BNSF would obviously have to be on board with that. I'm not sure if they would ever conceivably get to that point. I know when Denver was wanting to build the line out to Boulder, BNSF sent them a letter saying that they were not going to be able to electrify the line because, first off, they needed like $500 million to electrify it, and BNSF didn't know of any scenario where they could use their existing track maintenance equipment to maintain the track with catenary wires overhead, which is just ludicrous. But basically, they just say they didn't want to mess with it. And even if we're talking about the Union Pacific in San Francisco, like on the Caltrain corridor, the only way I can see UP running electric trains up that corridor would be if Caltrain bought them a couple of electric locomotives, maintained them all for free, and I don't even know what else UP would make them do, but I know that there's just not much interest with the freight railroads. Obviously, with rising fuel costs and potentially, you know, restrictions on diesel emissions in the future, it might become more attractive to them, but right now I just don't see it outside of, say, a short section of track like over the Cajon Pass, because it does take most trains like 2 to 3 hours to get over Cajon Pass. And so there would be a huge savings from the fuel right there if they weren't running at notch 8 for 2 to 3 hours. And same with going down. You know, when you're using dynamic brakes, it does accelerate the engine rev speed. So, but if they did electrify even that short distance, I mean, they would use electric locomotives out of LA, but then they would have to put diesel locomotives on all the trains, which would also be a huge cost because they would have to have crews to do that. It's not hard. It's just every little change like that adds time to the trains, and especially the high priority Z trains. I just want to get them out the door as fast as possible. So will I see it happening anytime soon? I don't know. Probably not. Freight railroads, until things change, they just really have no interest in doing it. I really like the HHP-8s. I just think they're a beautiful locomotive, and I wish they were still in service and weren't such pieces of junk, but it is what it is. The ACS 64s are much better locomotives, so I'm glad that Amtrak has them. All right, and for my last question, does it take more skill to run a diesel locomotive than light rail? Also, who or what decides when a train switches tracks? Does it take more skill to run a diesel locomotive than light rail? I'm gonna say yeah, probably. I don't want to knock any light rail operators out there, because the one thing I will say is, especially with light rail that has no automation, especially light rail lines that have street running, I'm sure that street running is fairly stressful because you can't control what idiots are going to jump out in front of you. But also, when you're running a light rail system like that, you have to stop the train in the same spot every station all day long, and it gets incredibly repetitive. And I can imagine that maintaining focus with such a repetitive work schedule like that would be pretty difficult, actually. I think, most people think that you could just zone out, and maybe that's the case, but if you zone out too much, then, bad things could happen. You could blow by a station, which wouldn't be good. So I think that there's definitely probably a lot of skill involved in running light rail trains. I've never had the opportunity to do that. But yeah, running a 19,000 ton coal train that's 1.5 miles long is probably more difficult than running a 3-car light rail train. Again, I'm not trying to knock anybody, it's just all I know, and that's what I'm going off of. It's not very difficult to actually operate the train. All of the skill that comes with operating large freight trains is maintaining good train handling so you don't rip the train apart, which some poor engineers do quite regularly. And also maintaining your speed and knowing where to stop and how to stop the train at the right spot that you need to. So anyway, I really hope you like this video. If you want to see more Q&As like this, please let me know, and please let me know if there's any questions that I didn't answer that you maybe have about being a locomotive engineer. Thanks a lot for watching. If you want to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or Patreon, you can actually check out the links in the description. And I hope you like this video, and I will see you all soon.